Alright, I'm back, and today I'm making some mugs. I'm going to show you how I throw these, and trim these, and pull handles, and attach the handles. And yeah, my entire process for these. Feels like a mug is what distinguishes every potter from the next, and yeah, these are mine. So I'm going to start off by wedging the clay, removing any air bubbles that might be trapped in there, getting those clay particles aligned, and making sure I have a much more pleasant throwing experience. If you've ever thrown with clay that isn't wedged properly, it almost becomes apparent immediately. It might feel like you're never ever able to get that clay on center, or for some reason there's just a tiny little air bubble in there and it's throwing everything off. Smacking that clay around, getting a nice little ball. See, I left some clay on there from the day before. Not always the best at cleaning my wheel head, but that's alright. So I'm going to smack that clay down, make sure it's really suctioned on there, and begin my centering process. So here I'm squeezing my hands together, coating that clay up, and then I'm going to push it back down onto center. I'll do this a couple times. Maybe here I just do it once. It's generally good practice to do it a couple times and make sure that clay is really aligned and there's not an air bubble in there before you start to open up that ball of clay. That's what I'll do next. Everyone has their own method for this. I use my two thumbs and then I drag them across that wheel head and try and just establish a nice flat base. I don't really trim the bottoms of these mugs, so I want to get it as thin as I can without being too thin. I imagine the flatness of that base and the sides of my walls to be a right angle on either side, and that's really going to help me for that first pull and make sure I'm not going to have any excess clay in a place where I don't want it. There's that first pull. I'm just pushing that clay towards the center of the wheel. I always want the rim of my pot to be moving towards the center of the wheel when I'm making these mugs. Here's my collaring method. I put my hands like that. It gives me 6 points of contact on the clay, and I've just found that to work the best for me. Getting that inside nice and wet. I don't want my fingers sticking anywhere for the second pull. And this is really where I'm going to pull most of the clay up from the bottom and distribute it throughout the pot, keeping a nice even pressure and pace as I move my fingers up that pot. These mugs really only take me 2 pulls. I try not to overwork the clay, and the less amount of time that I'm spending on these mugs, the faster I can make them, and that's generally a bonus for me. The faster I can do these, the better. I try not to think about money as time, time is money, but sometimes it's hard not to. Alright, now I'm going to use my rib and push the clay into the rib, not pushing the rib into the clay. This is going to compress those walls, remove that slip, and make sure I can take these pots off the wheel head without damaging them or getting my fingerprints all over them more than what already might happen. Just really refining the shape here and smoothing these things out. Take my sponge on a stick or sponge on a chopstick. I've had that for a long time. I made it at some point. There's my little chamois leather, just compressing that rim, getting it nice and smooth. Here's my gauge, my little pointer tool. This is something that I can't really throw without. if I'm making 20, 30, 40 mugs in a day and I want to throw them all to the same height and diameter, that's what allows me to do it. Cutting that pot off the wheel, removing the suction down there, drying off my hands before I move this thing, and yeah, I'll set it on the wear board. These generally dry for about 1 or 2 days before I start my trimming process. You'll see I have a chuck here. I have multiple chucks. I have chucks for trimming mugs, and I also have chucks for trimming narrow-necked pieces, like a bottle or a pitcher or anything of that nature. I think in the future I'll do a video on how I make these chucks and how I store them. And yeah, my little collection. Did I say the word chuck enough? It feels like now I did. Alright, placing the lugs down. These are so great for trimming mugs, especially because I don't want to flatten that rim at all on the wheel head. I want to have that nice roundness for drinking out of. You have to remember that the function of these is to be on somebody's mouth, and if you have some weird banged up rim, it's not going to be as comfy as what it could be. Here I'm tap centering, making sure that bottom, the base of the pot's nice and flat. It's funny, I feel like as soon as you start using these chucks to trim, when you're centering them, you're more focused on the bottom of the piece and how uneven it is than the sides of it. So right here I'm using that tool just to establish where I'm going to want the rest of my pot to line up. When I'm trimming these, I just want them to match what the inside of my pot looks like. I want my outside to match my inside, because if you have that happening, then you're ensuring that you've removed all the excess clay in spots where you don't want it. You'll have a nice light and uniform piece, and that's the goal here. Going back down, removing those trimming lines. I try to do as small of amount of trimming as I can, because I do like to move somewhat fast, and the less steps I have, just the quicker I can move and the more efficient I can be. That profile nice and cleaned up. Here I'll come back with my triangle tool and I'll bevel an edge into the bottom of this pot. I prefer a beveled edge to anything else. Foot rings, in my experience, are prone to chipping, and I want these pots to stand the test of time, or at least survive for as long as they can. And a beveled edge in general won't be prone to chipping the way a foot ring would be. So yeah, wet the outside and come back with my rib, my metal rib there, and I'll really smooth it out and get that slip off the side of the pot. Almost like I'm burnishing the side of the pot. Smoothing out that edge with my fingertip. That little tool too that I'm using that I just placed on the table there, that's just the rear lens cap for a camera lens. It's nothing too fancy. Here's what will be my handle, that little nub of clay. I'm just patting it between my two palms and getting it nice and flat. I prefer a flat handle. That's always how I've tried to pull them. Some people pull them round. I pull them flat. That's how I do it. And yeah, you'll notice here too that I'm pulling these handles and I'm attaching them later. I'm not pulling these off the mug. I will make another video for that maybe in the future. So when I'm pulling these handles, I'm pinching my index finger and my thumb together, and I'm rotating that handle every 3 or 4 times, making sure it's nice and even. I have a nice even pressure as I'm pulling down and moving that clay evenly throughout the handle. I'll set them on a wear board for 20 to 30 minutes until the consistency of the handle is the same consistency as my mug, is really what I want. Getting the shape of what I need, I'm going to remove the excess clay, and I'll smooth out that top portion right there. And this will really just line me up for attaching the actual handle to the mug. Alright, so I will look at the bottom of my mug. You can see where my little design, where that spiral kind of ends, is where I want my handle to start. So I'll score the top of the mug where my handle will be. Something that's so important for my process of attaching these handles is I want the consistency of my mug to match the consistency of my handle. I've found that it can really help you get away with a lot in terms of cracking while they're drying, in terms of the amount of slip that you apply, in terms of scoring and slipping. It just makes for such a smoother process and a much more worry-free process, I should say. Not all things are guaranteed in pottery, as we all know, but that can really help you. So I use my thumb there when I'm attaching these handles, and I kind of put like a thumb print into the top of the handle, and I think it just makes it feel really cozy and nice, and leaves you a little reminder of where my thumb was when I was attaching the handle. So then I'll kind of look at the profile, line it up, and try to get the proportions to make sense. I don't like when a handle sticks off really far from the mug. I want it to be comfy in the hand, and I also don't want it to stick absurdly far off of the pot. Here I'm just using my thumb with my fingers inside the mug so I don't distort the shape, to just press the base of that handle on there and make sure it's secure. That connection there of the base, I want it to be as strong as it can be. If it's going to fall apart or crack or, break further along, that's probably where it would happen. Here I wet my finger with a little bit of water, and I'm just smoothing out the transition between that handle and the mug, making a nice pretty curve. Just put some finishing touches on it, make sure everything looks proper, and I'll grab my little maker's mark and press it into the base of the handle, ensuring it's, really not going to go anywhere. And there we go. There's my mug. One of my mugs. One of the many mugs. Yeah, thanks for watching. And see you next time.